everybody, welcome back to World History. This is our last section of notes for the year. This is also our last section of notes for the unit. We're wrapping up World War II today. So, the war's aftermath. 50 million people were dead around the world. In Europe, the number was right around 30 million, over half of that number being civilians. The Soviet Union lost over 20 million. Hitler had said prior to the war, "Give me 10 years and you will not be able to recognize Germany." That would be true, because most of Germany would not be still standing at the end of the war. And it was a total war that left many cities in ruins, as you can see from these pictures here. Now, we had kind of known that something was going on in Germany towards the Jewish people, but we didn't truly know the scope of the Holocaust until after the war, when we really started to free the camps and discover what was going on. Now, later on, there would be some war crime trials, mostly due to the charge of crimes versus humanity, known as the Nuremberg trials, where the war crimes were held. They showed leaders could be held accountable for actions in war. They're still trying Nazis that they're finding today. I remember reading an article towards the end of last year, in 2021, of them arresting a 96-year-old woman that had been a higher up in the Nazi leadership and putting her on trial. She had to be transported there from her nursing home. Now, occupying allies, mainly the U.S., wanted to strengthen democracy and would ensure tolerance and peace. And in Germany and Japan, new constitutions and power to the people were restored. Japan was placed directly under the supervision and control of General MacArthur. They'd be under military occupation for a few years before we let them govern themselves on their own again. So another big thing that we have to talk about is the establishment of the United Nations, or the UN. It's an international governing body. Essentially, it replaced the League of Nations. The General Assembly has one vote for each country, and we established a Security Council really for the big countries. Now, the memberships of the Security Council changes every once in a while, but 5 of the seats are permanently held by representatives from the US, the Soviet Union, aka Russia today, Great Britain or the United Kingdom, France, and China. And they have the authority to ensure peace, and they are the only 5 countries that have the ability to veto any council decision. Now, beyond peacekeeping, they also tackle issues of disease, education, refugee relocation, economic development, the World Health Organization, and food and ag organizations as well. They're actually based in New York City. Now, the alliance breaks apart, really, and this is more so between us and the Soviet Union because we emerged as new world powers. For the most part, compared to Great Britain, France, Germany, Italy, we remained, especially the United States, we emerged from the war very much unscathed. Again, aside from the Battle of Pearl Harbor, we saw no fighting here stateside, so we were completely fine. And differences began to grow between the Allies. We all had seen the Nazis as the common enemy, like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And the governments of the Eastern Europe countries were divided. And it begins a period of history known as the Cold War, or a state of tension and hostility between nations aligned with the US on one side, and democracy, and the Soviet Union on the other side, or communism, without armed conflict between the major rivals. This period would last from 1945 until the late 1990s. So the Cold War would begin, and Stalin's goals were to spread communism in Eastern Europe. And by 1948, most of those satellite nations that we've talked about were pro-Soviet Union communist governments in place, and they created a buffer zone all the way up to Germany. And since we had split part of Germany with the Soviet Union, that part of Germany also became communist. And you may notice on this map, this little spot here, this is where Berlin is. That's because Berlin was put in a very interesting section because each of the 4 main powers would divide up the control of that one themselves. Okay, so there's not a good spot to put my little bubble there, so we'll go right there. So we also have the Truman Doctrine, or the U.S. policy to contain the spread of communism through a policy known as containment, or limiting communism to where it already existed. This would guide the U.S. for decades. We also have the Marshall Plan, a massive aid package of food and economic assistance to Europe to help countries rebuild and to strengthen democratic governments. Now, the Soviet Union refused any aid and didn't allow any of these Eastern European countries to accept this aid either, simply because it was like, we don't need that. We don't need you democracies getting in our way of our government. Now, this would lead to some hunger strikes all across Europe as well. Now, Germany would stay divided, and Western leaders wanted German economics to recover to restore political stability. Now, eventually, the Western side would unite the zones, and the Soviet Union was furious and denied further reparations and dug into East Germany. Now, Western Germany would become democratic. The people would write a constitution and be self-governing. In the eastern part, Stalin controlled a socialist dictatorship. Now, in Eastern Germany, the one exception was the city of Berlin. So let me move my bubble real quick to up here. If you look here, you'll see each section was controlled by a different group, because they thought since Berlin was the capital for most of Germany's history, that it shouldn't be under the control of just one power. So each of them united. Now, eventually, these three zones of Berlin would be unified into what we call West Berlin, and this would be East Berlin. Now, West Berlin used to escape the communist Eastern Europe, and Stalin wanted to stop this by forcing the Western powers to abandon West Berlin, which didn't happen. Now, eventually, right along this border, you'd see the Berlin Wall being constructed, and we'd see people struggling to survive because Stalin wasn't letting us in. Now, Stalin blockaded to prevent any supplies from getting in, but Allied cargo planes supplied West Berlin with food and fuel in the Berlin airlift. And in the West winds, the crisis deepens as well, because Stalin was not one to take losing very lightly. Now, we have opposing alliances that began to form. Well, look at that, more alliances. Remember how much problems those caused in World War I? Now, we have the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, and the military alliance of places like the US, France, the UK, Italy, Canada, Netherlands, Belgium, Norway, Denmark, Portugal, Luxembourg, and Iceland, essentially Western Europe. Then the Soviet response was the Warsaw Pact. Soviet Union, Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Poland, and Romania. Mostly these satellite states that were under heavy political, economic, and military influence. And it was used to keep people in line. So everything in blue was, and well, is still a part of NATO today, and everything in red was a part of the Warsaw Pact. Now, it was also a major propaganda war. The US was defending capitalism and democracy, and the Soviet Union was defending their moral high ground against Western imperialism. But both were a major world power. Realistically, both could rival each other in their development and their power. Now, we'll see this parodied in multiple movies, such as the Rocky films, further complicated by The Miracle on Ice in the 1980s, where the U.S. beat the Russians in hockey at the Olympics. Oh, they did not go over well for them. We also have movies like Red Dawn, a James Bond movie as well. And that's it. That is the end of our journey for us this school year, historians. Hopefully you've enjoyed the ride. Hopefully you've enjoyed having these little videos to catch little moments of our school year as we've progressed. Your assignment for today, yes, I know I can't end the last video without an assignment, is another one of those Shag reading packets on the Cold War. You'll find it on Google Classroom. You all know what to do with those. I'll see you all next time. Bye, everyone.